All right. Welcome, folks. Hopefully, as you're joining in here, we'll give it a couple more minutes for folks to join, but we're a little bit behind because, you know, as it would be for any SE, as you might experience in your own careers, technical difficulties. I've been having issues with Zoom and had to opt and run for another laptop here in the house to make this work. So hopefully we won't have any issues. But we're super excited here today to talk about a really important topic, which is how do we talk about competitive conversations with our customers? When do we bring it up? Why do we bring it up, and how? And I have two esteemed panelists here joining me today to talk a little bit about this topic. We've got Peter Cohan and Nidhi Shah joining us. I'll have them introduce themselves in a few minutes here. My name is Marjorie Abdelkrime, and I lead the solution architects here at VMware for our VMware Cloud on AWS solution. So, all right, so let's go ahead and kick us off here. So who do we have with us? Peter, can you give us a quick intro and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, and actually before I do, let me ask participants using the chat pane, give us two pieces of information. Number one, what's your job title so we have a sense of who's in the audience? And number two, if you have any specific objectives that you'd like us to try to cover in this session. And while you're doing that, so using chat, SE Manager, oh, hi, Diana. And we're going to have a poll as well that always takes care of that. My background, for those of you that don't know me, I'm simply a humble contributor to the pre-sales community. If you'd like more than that, I brought 2 product architectures to market, was banished to Basel, Switzerland in a pre-sales role for 2 years, actually had a ball. I've headed up marketing, I've been in sales, I headed up sales, I founded a business unit, founded 2 companies. The first one grew it up from an empty spreadsheet to a $30 million operation in which I was the customer. So there you go.
Nice. Well, we're super excited to have you join us, Peter. Nidhi, give us a little bit of info on yourself.
Yeah, so currently a sales engineering leader at Snowflake, recently joined the company, very exciting times ahead, and fortunate to be part of the journey ahead. I have an incredible team around me that really strives to understand a client's pain point and solve through technology. And this topic, quite passionate about because it's something we come across often, and it's important to be able to navigate within our role.
That's awesome. And as Peter mentioned, we do have the poll open. So we do want to know a little bit about our audience. And I'll go ahead and give it a couple more seconds here. And really what we'd like to do when we launch the poll is to just have a better understanding of who our audience is, make sure that we're tailoring some of our talk track to our participants and to the members that are joining us. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time for this webinar, for PreSales Collective webinar, we're super excited to have you join us, and hopefully you'll see and learn a little bit more about the mission as you hear the participants and panelists talk about, you know, why we want to talk about competitive play. But it's really about bringing together the SE community, whether it be leadership, individual contributors, or even folks that are just looking to learn a little bit more about the job. So hopefully you all join us on our Slack channel, on the blogs and the boards that we have online as well. And towards the end, I'll share a little bit more about how to have access to all of that great information. So with that, I'll go ahead and end our poll. But right now we have about 60% of you are joining us as SEs. We have actually 25% are leaders. And some of you are actually interested in the pre-sales role. So super excited to see that. And we have some AEs. So that's pretty cool because I know that all of you also face some of those questions and trying to understand a little bit more about how to bring up competitive dialogue in your conversation. And then some folks that are actually in different roles. So hopefully we can bring you some really exciting information in here and share with you, you know, how to have this conversation. And before we kick us off, so it looks like we have someone who's interested in the role and is asking us, what is an SE? And an SE is a sales engineer. And actually, as you'll hear this talk track, you'll hear a little bit more about how we engage our customers, how do we help our customers understand our solutions, the ones that we're trying to sell, and how do we talk about the competitive environment along with that. So hopefully, Eva, you'll learn a little bit more about that. If not, join us on the Slack channel, and I'm sure you'll get to hear some more about the job there. Again, thanks to the entire community, as I mentioned. You are what makes this possible. I love seeing the engagement within the Slack channel. as well as on the blog, the blogs and all of the boards that exist. So please keep up your engagement. Hopefully we'll address more topics that all of you bring to the PSC leadership team, and let us know how we can help. All right, so what are we talking about today, and how do we make sure that you're getting the most out of today? Make sure to ask questions, leverage the Q&A, so I'll be monitoring that along with a couple of other folks. Leverage a chat, have conversations with the folks out there. This is a great opportunity to meet other members in the community. I love the networking component of PSC, and it helps bring everyone together, and the chat function will hopefully drive that for all of you. All right, so we did the poll, we got ahead of ourselves on that one. So what are some of the key takeaways that the panels, as well as myself, we want you to take away is, we want you to focus on client needs, right? Really, that's at the end of the day what our job is, and how we make sure that we're driving success within our companies is by listening to the customer, trying to understand what exactly it is that they need. Should we even talk about the competition, right? Sometimes that's something that we really have to reflect hard on and really think about what is strategically the right thing to do. It's not about just throwing FUD out there and making sure that we're being strategic about if we should even introduce that. And then when do we do it? If we do decide that it's something we want to do, when do you actually start talking about the competition? And then finally, how to talk about the competition. I think this one's going to be super important, and Nidhi and Peter have some really great ideas that you all will get to hear a little bit about. So let's go ahead and get started. So first question, really, I wanted to ask Peter, when do you think it's appropriate for us to start talking about the competition?
Well, this is probably the single biggest challenge when we're having discussions and conversations with customers. And I would suggest the following. It's always appropriate to talk about the competition early in discovery, but without mentioning the competition specifically. And we should talk about examples of that, but very simply, in discovery is the best time to probe and discuss areas where you are competitively strong and potentially your competitors are weak, so that you can find out whether or not these are issues at all. So I like to suggest start speaking about your competition, but without actually speaking about them directly, and do it as early as possible. That would be a suggested starting point. Nidhi?
Just to tag along, so when we think about competitive differentiators, you can definitely leverage that in a way to highlight what your company can offer. That necessarily isn't a problem. Turning that conversation to Peter's point in terms of your competitors and kind of calling them out and calling out what they can't offer, that can become a problem. So you want to make sure that you're not bringing up competition proactively. If a client's asking about it, definitely acknowledge it. You don't want to make the mistake of ignoring the fact that competition may exist, right? But you want to acknowledge it, keep it short, and then steer the conversation back to the areas where you believe your solution is going to be superior. So keep the focus on what your company can do and how you will be a trusted partner to the client to help them address the business goal. And the one thing I'll say is think long-term, not just short-term.
And Nidhi and Peter, Tanner here asks us this question, which I think many folks tend to run into, is where, you already know your competition, their traditional behaviors, what they tend to do to undermine your position, the value that you bring. And it's really around pricing. Sometimes, some customers are price sensitive. If you already know that they tend to come in on the low end from a price perspective, do you bring that up? And is that something that you're proactive about, even if there isn't a need to really bring up the competitor?
Nidhi, you want to take this first?
Yeah, so a couple of things I'll say is, obviously pricing is an important factor. You'll have clients that are completely focused on that, and maybe their use cases aren't resulting in expansion down the road, and they're really just focused on a narrow thing that the competitor might offer. So try to keep that in mind, right? This is where it comes down to what is the client's need, and pricing can be a factor, but oftentimes clients are willing to invest more if they start to see that the investment will yield returns, not just for maybe what they are asking for or looking for today, but in terms of what does the partnership look like long term. So just a couple of things to keep in mind. Pricing can definitely be a factor, but you really need to dig into the use cases and what your company can actually end up enabling long term.
So I would add to that. It's all about, when somebody's thinking price, what they're actually thinking in a way is, what's the value we're going to get out of using these capabilities? So it's really three things together: price, value expectations of return, and then the specific capabilities that would contribute to, if you will, the value equation. So you could very easily be in situations where you're competing against someone whose price point is much, much lower. And here's an interesting note. It may be that that offering with the lower price point is the best fit for the customer, in which case you may actually want to make that recommendation. Contrary-wise, as you probe in discovery and you begin to broaden, if you will, the real estate of needs for the customer, and the price point for the lower offering is here in terms of specific capabilities, and you've uncovered that it's this range, well, then you've built up the value equation, and price probably ceases to become an issue. Hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that those are both great points, right? So normally if you're, from what I'm hearing from both of you, normally if you already kind of understand their value prop, we've seen that come up often here at VMware as well as other companies, where we try to avoid that conversation. You need to focus on the value that you're both bringing, and make sure that the conversation really focus on, really at the end of the day, what's the outcome that the customer is looking to drive, and steer away from a pricing perspective. Because honestly, if it's going to be a fight over pricing, sometimes you're just not going to win, right? Especially if you've got a solution that tends to be more encompassing and bringing in more aspects of the solution. Great points, both Nidhi and Peter. So then let's talk a little bit about, okay, so now we've decided, we're going to start talking about the competition. And, even Amanda asks this question in the Q&A, right? How do you address, the competitor? What's the best way to do it, especially when they're throwing FUD potentially around their configuration and how they POC? They might say that they're simpler. So what are some things that you might do, and what's the best way to bring it up? Let's start with that, Nidhi.
Yep. Couple of points that I'll call out. So number one thing is, don't be negative. So clients don't, at the end of the day, care about the turf wars that might be happening. They really want to make a decision about investing in a solution, and I say solution, not a product, right, that can help them solve their business problem. So you want to keep a very neutral tone. Stick to the facts as much as possible. A dishonest answer or response can impact your company's image and your ability to actually build trust with that client. So, again, don't prioritize short-term gain over long-term partnership. A couple of other things, I mentioned this before, but steer the conversation back to what you can actually enable, versus focusing on, what a competitor can't or can do. And the last thing I'll say is, I'm a big believer of this, but don't make the competitors look bad just to make yourself look good, right? Clients catch on to this very quickly, and it doesn't help your goal in terms of creating a long-term, trusting, credible partnership or relationship with that client. So as I mentioned, you can definitely talk about, differentiators and how your solution is, what it can enable, tied to what the client's looking for, what their business goals or pain points are. But you want to make sure that the tone is very neutral, especially when you are touching on competition in any way.
Yeah, keep it classy, right? I think that's really the way you want
right. Exactly.
You want to position yourself and demonstrate that you're not going to get into the mud, so to speak, with the competitor and slinging things back and forth. No, that's a really great insight, Nidhi.
And
okay.
I was just going to say one other thing that I want to mention is, if you think about the time it takes and the time that we get with clients, it's not easy to get. So make sure that you're really leveraging that time, again, in the most effective way possible, and make sure that it is respectful all around. So just another thing to add on to that.
Yeah, Marjorie,
no, absolutely.
A couple of additional thoughts. I cannot tell you how many times I will watch a corporate overview or product presentation, most typically from the sales side of the house, where they, in the very beginning of the product portion of things, they talk about something like, what I'd like to do is share our competitive differentiators. And well, let me ask the audience something. Using the chat dialog box, how many of you are familiar with the idea of buying it back? Buying it back. Give me a yes or no or whatsoever. Buying it back. Not familiar? Yes. Okay, we got a bunch. Okay, we got enough no's. Buying it back. Have you ever had a situation where you're in a negotiation for that license agreement and the customer says one of two things? Either they say, do you have a light version of your offering? Or they say, you showed us a lot of things we're never going to use. So either take them out or give us everybody type the word in your chat dialog box. You guys can say it. A discount, yeah. That's called buying it back. And This is a constant risk with competitive differentiators. Competitive differentiators are only competitively differentiating if they are situationally relevant. Should I say that again in different word order? In other words, if it's not a capability that they need or are interested in, it is not a competitive differentiator in your favor. It's actually a competitive differentiator in your competitor's favor. So think in terms of what is their set of needs versus what are the capabilities in your offering, map accordingly, line up the competitive differentiators against what the needs are versus the whole product set. By the way, product managers are going to be listening to this saying, oh, no, you need to tell them everything. They are wrong.
Right. I 100% agree, right? It's focus on ultimately at the end of the day, what you're trying to focus on is really the needs of the customer. And we talked about this at the entry point, right? Is how do you make sure that you're listening to what the customer needs and focus on highlighting your strengths in those areas as much as possible. Right. So that makes 100% sense. So we decided, that we're going to talk about our competitors. Now let's talk about some of the landmines that you might see in your demos. How do you set them? How do you make sure that, Amanda asks also, how are you proactive and reactive, around this? And I think setting landmines is potentially a way that you could do that. So I'm curious, Peter, what are your thoughts here?
So the best time, I've said this before, the best time to set landmines or to competitively outflank. Does anybody know? Type it in your chat dialog box. I'm curious to see what people say. The best time to do that is when? Yes, thank you, Mike. In discovery, absolutely. Here's an idea to keep in mind. For every competitively advantageous feature or capability in your offering, you should have at least one discovery question that is designed to either rule that capability in, rule it out, or make it neutral, if you will. Because it's in discovery that you can set the best landmines. If you know there are holes from a battle card or competitive analysis that you can fill versus your competition, ask questions in discovery. You say things like, so, is the situation where you blah, 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 is that something that you frequently encounter? The customer says, oh, yeah. You say, well, we have that capability. Let's plan to include it in the demo. You have just set a terrific landmine because the customer now sees this as a specific capability they feel they're going to need to solve the problem. If the competitor can't fulfill that, you have outflanked them in that area. So the best place to do it is actually in discovery. If we have time, we could also talk about a mechanism for effectively dealing with a similar situation when you're in the midst of a demo and you suddenly realize, oh, there's something these guys need to see, but you've not introduced it earlier. But let me turn this back to the two of you.
Yep. Yeah, and the thing that I'll add on here again, when we're talking about discovery, discovery is such an important part of the sales cycle, right? Because you really need to be able to, not only are you understanding what that client's potential pain points are, and maybe they're identifying it and they know it, but that's also your opportunity to really understand their business, ask the right questions, and maybe uncover additional pain points or business goals that they might not be thinking of. So discovery is absolutely, for this and in general, it is the foundation of a lot of what we're talking about here, and how we actually get the win or how we navigate the conversations with the client down the road.
And something that the two of you triggered from a thought perspective here is, I found a lot of clients, they tend to already have something kind of set in their mind, and they're already working with an organization to help them kind of define some of that criteria. And that criteria tends to be preset based off of a specific company's solution, right? I've seen this many times where we're being set up with the landmines because the company set up, whether it be their RFP, right, or their discovery questions or their POC, and we'll talk about that here in a few. A lot of their requirements are being preset. They don't necessarily always know that. They might have Googled it online and pulled out some sheets that might have guided them in a specific direction. So that's something to keep in mind, is that discovery not only helps with what Peter and Nidhi mentioned, but it also helps you understand kind of how are they thinking and who's helping guide their thinking, right? And that you should be able to, again, from experience, having dealt with a specific competitor, frequently you'll already start to see that during the discovery phase kind of surface itself. So you should be prepared during those conversations.
I would love to hear answers how do people answer the question when the customer asks, how do you compare with your competitors? Because I have some suggestions. What do you guys say? And I'd love to hear it in chat as well if people have any suggestions. How do you compare with your competition? What do you say? Go ahead. Well, I meant Nidhi and Marjorie first. Accentuate straights. Excellent, Drew.
Yeah, so oftentimes what I will do is kind of what you touched on, Peter, before, is again, once when that question comes up, it really is explaining again what your strengths are in terms of what you're offering, and not just in terms of the product, right? The overall solution. And when I think about solution, I think of the actual product that you're offering, but then what else comes with it, which is the support, the ability to tap into the resources that we have, the consultative nature that you'll get with working with our company, things like that. And so I think of solution as in the entire spectrum, not just the product. And so oftentimes, again, it comes down to really understanding what the foundation is that you're looking at and the needs are. And then in terms of answering that question, then it comes down to, well, really tapping into it and helping them understand how your company or your offering is going to help enable that.
Scott Fisher here shares in the Q&A. He says he's not giving away his secrets.
I love that. I love that. Thanks, Scott.
I didn't give away my secret entirely either.
I have an answer that a very, very successful sales rep taught me when I was just that high. She said, she told the customer, I was in this meeting, when the customer said, well, how do you compare with your competition? She says, I don't think it really matters how I think we compare with the competition. The real issue is, how do you feel we compare with the competition? And then she went on and said something that Srinivasan said. She says, I don't work for my competitor, so I really can only speak about what I know, which is our offerings. And here's where, in the context of what you've told me so far, I think we do well. Here's where we might be able to improve or whatsoever. But the context here is really critical.
Yeah, and actually Ben says the same thing, right? He actually mentions, you're asking me, the vendor, to tell you about my competition. We're the best, right? Let's talk about what we're trying to do.
Would you like a horror story?
A horror story? Oh no. Yeah, sure.
Horror stories are so much fun. So this is back almost last century when I was the customer and I was leading this business unit, and we were buying a bunch of stuff, CRM systems and CAD/CAM packages and all kinds of things. And I'm in a demo meeting with a vendor, and one of the guys in my team said, well, who are your competitors? And what does the guy do? He starts to list them. He says, they're this and this and this and that. And I heard the number 4, and I said, oh, I hadn't thought about them. You're right. I should probably contact them and find out. So there's a lesson there. What is it?
Yes, I was just going to say that, Peter. You might introduce competitors that your clients are not even considering as part of the conversation. And then just overall, again, it comes down to, steer the conversation back to what you know best, right? Like at the end of the day, you might have battle cards, you might have training about the competition and what they can offer and whatnot, but you know your product and you know your solution better than you know theirs, right? At the end of the day. So focus on that.
So speaking of solutions, right, and really, positioning ourselves for success with our customers. So a lot of our customers do ask for us to do head-to-head POCs or pilots. What is your advice for navigating these head-to-head evaluations, Nidhi?
Yeah, and I would love to hear what people in the audience think in terms of what they've experienced as I kind of dive into a couple of points from my side. But one of the things I've realized is, first, it's super important to determine, is it actually needed versus is it a nice to have ask from your customer, right? Or the client that you're talking to. Maybe running these for every client is not going to be scalable for your company. So you have to understand what the opportunity cost is to run a head-to-head evaluation, to run a POC, and the benefits and what you're going to gain from it. So start to really define those guidelines.
Let me pause and just jump in here. This is huge. I think everybody in the audience needs to take a deep breath and say the following words. Our objective is to secure the order with the least expensive form of proof. Everybody say it out loud.
ahead. I actually
Prove the value in the least expensive way. Yes.
There you go.
funny.
So go ahead, Marjorie.
And she would tell me, she's like, Marjorie, anytime I hear POC, I hear purchase order canceled.
Well, it doesn't have to be that way. But, you know, when you think about it, the higher you go in the hierarchy, as you move towards the C-suite, the less detailed proof they need. And in fact, it's quite possible, I used to do this, it's quite possible that all you want to know is another peer in a similar situation using the package. So I might call up Nidhi and say, hey, you know what, I'm contemplating buying Horizon from VMware. I understand you guys are using it. 2 questions. Number 1, is it working for what you wanted? Number 2, would you buy it again? And if the answers are yes, I may never need to see anything else. So think about that. You know, reference call, a lightweight demo, a deeper demo, POC, pilot. You really want to be going this direction as much as possible.
Right, exactly. And, you know, in the cases where you deem that it is very necessary, you know, the 2 bullet points that I'll call out is understand, again, what you're enabling, what the needs are, and understand what the competition is around you. But the main important thing with this is when you actually go down the path of doing a head-to-head evaluation or a POC, you really have to set the success metrics. You have to set the testing methodology, the limitations, all of that up front. And it's so important to be able to establish this with your client because you want to create fairness in evaluation at the end of the day. You want to show that you are proactive and you care about their success versus I'm just trying to win this POC or this head-to-head evaluation.
Yeah, and we're really talking about bake-offs here, if I'm understanding this correctly.
Yeah.
So this goes back to discovery. It goes back to defining specific capabilities based on what the customer needs are. And very frankly, you also need to make an evaluation. Are we in a reasonable position to win this, or are we just wasting an opportunity and time? There are only about 200 selling days per year. So this is something to contemplate.
And so Bob Ha asks us, what is a POC? POC stands for proof of concept, and this is how you validate the solution that you have. But, you know, Ben actually makes the comment earlier that, you know, he tries to impress upon the customer or client that the POC is really a project, right? So this is something that you need to make sure that they understand that it's not just resources from your side, but also resources from their side that need to be invested and dedicated to the overall project that you're looking to launch. All right, and actually the person who told me about POC just asked us a question, purchase order canceled. Hi, Stacy. She mentions here that there are other ways to demonstrate, you know, the solution, and that's boardroom POCs, which I've seen her do this extremely well in the past as well. And, you know, making sure that you have a controlled environment, you limit the amount of time, right? You put a couple of hours, you say, all right, let's sit down together. I'll bring in the, you know, whether it be, you know, actual devices, if you need to bring actual hardware, you bring in the hardware. If it's a SaaS environment, right, you set up the environment yourself and you validate with a very controlled method, right, which sometimes that's all the customer wants to see. They want to see the clicking. Oh, how do you click here? How do you click there? What does that button do? How do I make sure that I can do this? And if you can limit some of the external variables, doing it in a boardroom type of setting, I think helps facilitate some of those scope creep issues that you'll see. Thanks for the reminder there, Stacy.
I feel like we're moving into another whole webinar. By the way, on POC, yeah. Before we do, and so that we don't, I do want to reference Tony Matos has a terrific new book that he just released perhaps about a month ago on POCs. So Tony Matos, M-A-T-O-S, check it out on Amazon.
Awesome, will do. And let's make sure that we document that so we could share it on some of the Slack channels. So, you know, we talked about POCs here at length, and you're right, I feel like we were going down an additional path, but sometimes, you know, that can lead to your overall competitive situation going poorly. What have you done and what have you seen, you know, in a situation that's gone poorly? What happened, and then how did you save yourself from that situation? Peter, let's start with you on that one.
How many stories could we possibly tell on this? So I already gave you the reference, the example of the guy that offered too many competitors, and we started adding to the list that we wanted to look at. Competitive situations go poorly all the time. Situations where you simply don't have the capabilities, in which case you've got to make a decision early on. Is this a project? Is this an opportunity we can really win? So I think that's part of the, if you will, the sales rationality equation. One of the challenges here, of course, being that typically the sales side of the house is saying, hope, hope, hope. And we're saying, nope, nope, nope. Actually, I just made that up. That's kind of clever.
I like that it rhymes.
It happened. Situations where things go poorly, where you know you're out of alignment. Ben just said, you just described my work life. Where you know you're out of alignment. I think we can take a lesson from customer success here, because customer success teams have been teaching us and all of us that you've got a sweet spot for success. And as you begin to move outside of that, you're at greater and greater and greater risk. So making the decisions, is this an area that we want to compete, or is this an area that we want to let it go for now, is probably your first choice. The situations where things have gone poorly, the worst for me, is exactly those. We were trying to reach outside of our sweet spot marketplace. So I hope that helps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can dive into one that I have, because I'll contribute to these horror stories. But we were in a competitive RFP, and honestly, we didn't do the best we could to really define the success metrics that I'm talking about. It was one of those situations where we were going to do this head-to-head evaluation. We didn't define a lot of that ahead of time. And so what that it ended up doing was creating confusion all around with client, internally, and the result of that was we were scrambling internally to make it better. And so in trying to save that situation, initially, we were starting to give a lot of things away that we knew would create problems for us in the future in our ability to actually serve that client. And so what we ended up doing is really taking a step back and having more of a discovery, level setting conversation again. And one of the things I realized through that is clients don't need you to say yes to everything. They don't need you to just be a yes man, right? Or a yes woman. They need you to be honest. They need you to work with them as a partner, because otherwise you're just left as a vendor that's just trying to sell them things.
Gary just offered something to the panelists, said he had a competitor rule themselves out of a large opportunity when they were flinging mud, left a very bad taste with the customer. So there's another example of what not to do.
Right.
Yeah. It's to stay classy, right? I think customers get turned off when you're not staying classy, and immediately, they start to recognize, well, if this is how you treat just your competitors, I wonder how you treat your customers, and the wheels start, going in terms of how you're treating others. All right, so let's move on to our next question. So what are your thoughts around dealing with competition? And many of us deal with this, right? I know here at VMware, we do this. Previous companies I've worked with, they're competitors, but sometimes they want to go on they're partners, but sometimes they want to go at it on their own. So it ends up becoming competition. So I'm curious, from your perspectives, what do you do? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah.
Who would you like? Go ahead, Nidhi.
I was just going to say, Peter, do you want to take this, and then I can jump in?
Well, I'll start, and you can join me.
Yeah.
So today's competitor is tomorrow's partner, and may in fact become your boss 3 weeks after that. So it's a small world. Bear that in mind. And Marjorie, you've got to have encountered that at VMware, where VMware has just regularly competes with an organization, then buys them and folds them into the organization. So bear that in mind. It's a limited ecosystem. Even your most bitter competitors may become your partners. So I would bear that in mind. The fact of the matter is today there are large organizations with tons of offerings. VMware is a great example of that, that are competing in some cases with other organizations, and at the same time I would say Amazon is a great example there for you, Marjorie. And so actually, let's turn it around. Marjorie, how do you deal with Amazon? Ha, 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 ha.
Oh, dear Lord. I deal with that one quite often. They're a great partner. I think strategically speaking, the way I position my team is, we need to look at the bigger picture, right? Amazon brings to us an entry point that sometimes we don't always have access to. So you've got to take advantage of those relationships, make sure that they understand the value. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that we do here at VMware is how do we make sure that these co-opetition companies and these organizations that we work with closely understand why we should partner together versus them going at it alone. So we do, my team spends a lot of time with the AWS team. Actually, I just got an email earlier today from one of the leaders on my team. He was enabling some of the core solution architects for the public sector team. And that's what it's about. Constant communication, constant demonstration of the partnership, constant demonstration of what that value is.
Right.
And it's important to communicate to the customer that it is a mix, that, yeah, you know, for some areas we're going to compete fiercely, and in other areas we're partnering, and we're partnering equally fiercely, if you will, and just to be very clear about that.
Yeah. And just to touch on everything that you both said, you know, one of the things is it's actually becoming a reality. More and more companies are taking that neutral standpoint and competing, but also working with those, you know, competition or competitors as partners. And so, you know, strategy is ultimately the key here. You can enable a lot of win-win situations with the right partnership. So sometimes it's not about, you know, trying to win business away from them. Sometimes the best approach is to actually work together in different ways to, you know, understand if you can together grow a market for both the companies. And so the way I think about it is, you know, I've definitely had a lot of experience with co-opetition, but it really is a balancing act, and strategy ends up being really the key. And then, you know, when you define a strategy as a company, you can start to actually work with those partners to define joint messaging. You can really have a talk track that kind of aligns with, you know, on the both sides in terms of what you're going after.
Yeah.
I love Ben's comment here. He says, the older I get, the smaller the world seems to become, which means in my case, the world now is about a 1 kilometer sphere.
So let's talk a little bit about, you know, this next question here, which is if you work for a company that's product is competitive but inferior, and I know some of us have definitely been through that. How do you navigate? How do you suggest people navigate through these situations, right? They recognize that they might be, you know, kind of that startup that's starting to build some of the positioning and strength for themselves. They're not the big player just yet. How do you navigate through this? And Nidhi, you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, so the first thing I will say is the word inferior is very subjective, and my initial recommendation is to not perceive it from that angle, because it really defeats the purpose of why you're going to pursue an opportunity at all. But it comes down to ultimately what we've been talking about, which is like, what is the client really looking for, right? Like that is the first and foremost, that is the foundation of everything you're talking about, because it helps you identify, can you offer that out of the box? Is that an opportunity for you to build it, even if it's not overnight, right? So make sure that when you're talking to a client, you're establishing that sort of like feedback loop through the process and providing them visibility into your product roadmap and in the development that you're prioritizing. And then lastly, I said this before, but again, you're not just selling products, you're selling solutions, and you want to work to gain that trust of that client, and clients want to feel confident in your company. And so, you know, continue sharing your vision and how you're going to help them achieve their business goals long term and their objectives, right? And so that's kind of how I think about it is, you know, even if you can't enable everything for them today, that's not to say that you can't down the road. And it really is about creating a trusting partnership with them.
And Drew and Jolie just said that, right? They said specifically partnerships, right? People buy from people, and they're not buying just a bill of goods. So
exactly.
Great. Peter, thoughts there?
Sure. So for 13 and a half years, I worked for a company where our product was not the best in the space, and yet we dominated the space. If you guys want to look up MDL, Information Systems, you'll see the tangible evidence of that. But how did we do that? Well, for several reasons, but probably the most important of which was we took a whole product analysis perspective on the offerings and the customers. And for those who are familiar with Jeffrey Moore and McKinsey, whole product analysis says your customer is looking to purchase, as Nidhi said, not just a product, not just a solution, but actually a relationship, a partnership. So it's not just the product, it's the support, it's the roadmap, it's the consulting organization, it's you guys who are working specifically with the customers, it's the relationship of that, it's the whole product that is being analyzed, if you will, on the part of the customer. And so, yeah, we're constantly trying to play catch up with features. our competitors would come out with really new groovy things. We go, oh man, how did they get there first? And we would catch up a year later. I'll talk about atom-atom mapping if you want to. Anyway, for those, Kevin Cronin, you in the audience? Anyway, and you know, well, how did we win? Well, we won because the customers knew that we would get there. We would do it in a way that was great for the customers. They could count on us. Our prices were high, but the value was there, and it was the whole product analysis that really made that happen.
Right. And I was just going to say, Peter, they trusted in you, the integrity and the honesty that you brought to the table and your team brought to the table. I mean, there's so much comes down to it, right? I've experienced where, you know, things go down and it impacts the client's business. And it's not so much about that, hey, something went down that impacted us. It's more about, well, were you proactive in letting us know? Were you proactive in helping us understand what the impact was going to be? Were you proactive in, you know, having that communication with us? Like, some of it comes down to it. The idea of everything's going to be perfect and you're going to find a solution or whatnot that's going to, you know, enable every need that you have. I mean, that's not really realistic, right? So, yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to go sideways for a second. I was swindled into a sales role coming out of a pre-sales role, coming out of Switzerland. I was swindled and convinced that I should go into sales. And kicking and screaming, I did so. I was your friendly neighborhood regional sales director in the U.S. West for the same company I mentioned earlier. And what I found was, because I had come out of the technical pre-sales environment, I was, Nidhi, exactly what you said. I was considered credible and trustworthy by my customers. I didn't push them. I didn't prod them. I answered their questions. I saw my job is to enable their buying process. And I think that made a huge difference in the competitive play as well, because I became, very frankly, part of their whole product analysis. They would prefer to buy from somebody that didn't pressure them and delivered the goods than an organization that was constantly saying, are you ready to buy yet? Are you ready to buy yet?
Right.
Are we there yet?
Yeah, exactly. And the only time you're engaging is if there is something that you can upsell or something you want them to buy. I mean, I think, again, it comes down to build the right relationships with your clients and have that conversation going, right? Even if, you know, there isn't something on the table that they're looking to buy at the moment.
Hey, Peter, Amanda asks, the product analysis, who did you say to look into in regards to learning more about it?
Yeah, it's called whole product analysis, just as Amanda spelled it with a W. I believe it was Jeffrey Moore who articulated it in one of his early books, like Crossing the Chasm. I think it actually came out of McKinsey Consulting, but look it up, whole product analysis. You probably just Google it, you'll find the references, but it's very simple. It's everything that the customer is looking at, not just your product, can contribute to your competitive spectrum, if you will.
Awesome. So we've learned a ton, right? And I actually feel like I learned a ton myself. So now what? How do we share this with our teams? You know, how do we make this into something that's actionable for our organizations? And Nidhi, let's start with you.
Yeah. So, you know, when you learn about competitive intel and you learn about all of these things, like the question is, well, what do you do with it, right? You know, what I've seen to be successful is this is pretty common across the board. You know, you'll have battle cards and you'll have documentation that really, you know, covers a lot of the areas of strengths and the area of weaknesses. I think it's really important to be able to have those, you know, document or battle cards or, you know, however you do it to be able to reference. So, you know, one, do that and train your team so that they understand what they're looking at as far as the industry goes. The thing that I'll re-emphasize is that intel shouldn't be used to, you know, bring up to clients what a competitor can't do. Again, make sure you're respectful, make sure that, you know, everything that we've talked about till now, you're kind of keeping that in mind. Really, a lot of the intel that you get, it should be used to strengthen your position and the talk track in terms of what you can enable and offer to that client at the end of the day.
Yeah, you know, I think you put it really nicely there, Nidhi. I think the point is about learning behaviors of the competitors so that you can then better address it yourself.
Exactly.
Right?
Right.
And it, you know, some of the commentary where I said, you know, think about the questions that you're hearing. Is that traditionally what your competitor is asking? And there's those in, you know, in your customer's mind. So I love that idea. Document it, make sure the the team has access to that information so that you all learn what those behaviors are and then are able to execute against them effectively. Peter, what are your
So I have sort of a novel idea, and it goes along the lines like this. Somebody asks you for a demo. What I often like to say is if I know or have understood at this point that they have a system in place that they're contemplating changing, I will say, before I demo to you, I'd like to ask you to demo to me. And when you do that, if they say yes, it's fabulous, it's gold, it's iridium, it's platinum, go right down the periodic table, you'll get everything. What you'll learn is what they like in the offering, which you do not want to beat up, and you need to understand those are perceived as the competitive strengths. You'll learn what they don't like, which is, of course, pain points and opportunities, and you'll often learn about capabilities they simply are unaware of or are in your competitor's offering, because none of us use everything that's in our offerings. So I love this idea of before I demo to you, why don't you demo what you're using today back to me?
I love that. Very novel, for sure. I like that idea. Well, hopefully, folks were able to pick up some of the key takeaways here. If you have any questions, go ahead and continue to post them here as we're wrapping. Huge thanks to Nidhi and Peter. So much great information here that we could all take, around how do we focus on our clients' needs. And I hope you all can take this recording and maybe, re-listen to it in the future, because so many good tidbits here that I think I'm going to even share this with my organization, make sure that they can hear about it. The other one is, should we even talk about it? Let's be strategic about how we engage our competitors and how do we bring that into the conversation. Also, when and how, right? I think those are very crucial. Like Nidhi said, make sure that we keep it classy. As Peter mentioned, let's make sure that we're focusing on the value of what we're actually talking about. So, Brian here asks us, how early in the process do you make sure you're selling to decision makers versus a project team charged with doing research for the buyer?
Nidhi, do you want to start, or you want me to?
Yeah, and so the thing I'll say from my experience is, sometimes one of the most important things in a sales cycle is to start to identify the different personas that you're really talking to. So who's going to actually use the product day to day? Who's going to end up being the one that kind of signs on the contract in terms of, budgets and things like that. It's so important to be able to identify that, right? Because at the end of the day, depending on what your company is offering, selling to someone that's going to be really impacted on a day-to-day basis, I mean, you might be talking to someone that may not have the decision buying power. And so the thing I'll say is, it depends on kind of when the buyer is going to kind of come into play in your sales cycle. Obviously, you want to try to get them into the loop as quickly as possible, but create a person internally at the client side that is going to be your voice, right? And I've seen a champion, exactly. Someone that's going to really be able to work with you, understand, how it impacts their business overall, not just from a day-to-day perspective, but overall from a business goals and whatnot, and have that champion actually be on your side to be able to determine, and go to that, economic buyer to make the case for you. So that's kind of what I would say is you really need to identify a champion. You need to continue having those conversations with the people that are going to be impacted day to day, and then you need to try to get to the person that's going to actually end up signing on that contract at the end of the day, and make sure that they're on board as well.
So I'm going to add to this and say, generally speaking, because all products and organizations are different, but generally speaking, call high. Start high, because how many of you guys are familiar with the pyramid that shows yes, 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 and then no.
Yes, I was just going to say no.
No. So it's the John Mulaney. No. Yeah. So if you want to avoid that, and you actually want to start from the top, you've got a huge advantage. You've got sponsorship at a high level. This person will organize the right resources for you, so you're not beating your way uphill, but you're, if you will, flowing your way downhill. So I rather strongly recommend calling high if it's the logical approach for your software. I'll caveat that and say, I know there's a lot of products out there that go after the individual staff or the practitioner, but if you're looking for the bigger orders and the, if you will, the the more certain sales cycles, I think it's more productive to start high.
Right. And just to add on to that, I think it ultimately comes down to, do you understand the client that you're talking to? Because in some cases, you might have the right relationships and the ability to start high, but maybe you don't in all the cases. And so maybe you really have to start to kind of, start with the people that are more on the lower side, and then move towards, creating a champion for yourself so you can actually, pitch that to the people that will end up actually signing. So it really depends on the client that you're talking to and kind of the situation and stage you're in.
Yeah. So, real quick here, Peter, one question that came up for you was, would you recommend that this process is used for internal grown systems and projects that you're doing internally, or is this just for external vendors?
I'd say both, absolutely both. And yeah, I'm bearing in mind that it's quite likely there's an NDA in place between the competitive system vendor and the customer. However, if they're willing to show it to you or they haven't thought about it, so there.
Yeah.
But I would say both.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. I think there's, so much information here. One thing I wanted to share with you, I wanted to get feedback from the audience here, if I can get my screen to work. Yeah, there we go. Is to get your thoughts. I want to hear, how did we do? And are we going to see you at our next webinar, which is why inclusivity matters for closing business. So take a moment here and let me see if I see any questions. Tons of great information here from the folks being shared.
I'd like, while this is going, I'd like to suggest it for the future, at least 2 additional webinar topic areas. One is managing POCs.
I love
because
that.
that's clear.
Right.
And the other,
yeah.
and the other,
it starts to like, how do you even define a POC? I've had so many back and forth in terms of like, how do you even define what a POC really is? This
is like a button, right? You say POC and everybody goes boom.
Exactly.
So POCs would be one, and the second is a topic that I think is really intriguing, and that's renewal and expansion demos. So how are those the same? How are those different from, if you will, landing the business? So anybody doing land and expand, we tend to focus most of our time on land. I would love to have the conversation about this expand and the renewal.
Yeah, I like that. Well, James and Yugi, we'll get you guys to start planning that for our next one. All right. So, thank you both, Nidhi and Peter. I think you guys did such a phenomenal job being very crisp about how we handle these very sensitive situations. So I appreciate, the time that both of you took, both from a planning perspective as well as here, to give us some input on how to best manage that. So for the folks that are on the line, thank you for attending. I know there were some questions about whether or not we do this often. Yes, there's a podcast, so check it out. Every Monday a new one comes out. So there's other forums that we release information out. We also have a Slack channel, so take a moment, join the Slack channel. I think there's an opportunity for all of you to engage in the conversation. There are tons of different channels that are on there. A new one that just got created today was outdoor cooking, which I'm starting to get into, so I'm looking forward to learn from everyone.
Outdoor cooking.
So great there. And then the next upcoming webinar for the folks that we're interested in is why inclusivity matters for closing business. And this is such an important topic these days, both for the team members that are individual contributors as well as leaders. So I really hope all of you take a moment to join us, whether it be live or the recording, and listen to this very important topic. We have such great leaders that are joining us to talk a little bit about this next week. And as I mentioned, we have some other forums as well. So for the leadership, if you all are interested in joining a group of leaders to talk a little bit about best practices, how to best manage things like compensation plans, capacity planning, all of that fun stuff that sometimes you're being told to figure out all on your own. You don't have to. Some great leaders that are participating in the leadership collective. And then for the leaders as well, we're planning an executive summit towards the end of October. If you're interested in joining us, please take a moment and register yourself. It's the 28th and 29th of October. Hopefully we'll get to see you there. And join us on LinkedIn. Tons of great information gets shared there. If you're not going to join the Slack channel, here's where we post a lot of information about upcoming webinars and sessions. And hopefully we'll see you all here in a couple of weeks to join us for our next session. Thank you, Nidhi.
Marjorie, can you let the audience know where they will be able to find this recording and perhaps other webinars?
Yes.
and podcasts?
All of that is posted on the presalescollective.com. You'll find a drop down there where you'll see webinars, and you'll be able to see past recordings there.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone, and looking forward to seeing all of you in the next one. Thanks, Peter and Nidhi.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Well done.
Thank you.